I have a confession to make.
Oh.
When I pick up a nonfiction book, or, even a novel sometimes, if there's a long prologue or a really dense introduction, I skip it.
You and everyone else.
I just want to get straight to the action. And I suspect I'm not alone in this, especially when it comes to, say, the Bible.
You are definitely not alone. I mean, the skip intro button was practically invented for ancient literature.
Right. And there is no greater barrier to entry than the very first page of the New Testament. You open Matthew chapter 1, you're expecting wisdom or a story, and you just hit a brick wall.
17 verses of names.
Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob. It just goes on and on. It looks like some dusty ledger from a census bureau that hasn't been touched in 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Most people's eyes just glaze over.
It's arguably one of the most ignored texts in the Western canon. But, and this is the thing, if you skip it, you are actually missing one of the most politically and religiously explosive opening statements ever written.
That is a bold claim for a list of unpronounceable names. But looking at the stack of research we have for this deep dive, I'm starting to see what you mean. We aren't just looking at a family tree here.
No.
We're looking at a carefully constructed legal document, a piece of political subversion, and honestly, a soap opera.
A soap opera is a very, very accurate description, actually.
So that's our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into Matthew chapter 1. We're going to try and decode the hidden numerical structure of this list, uncover the scandals buried in the names, especially the women, and then pivot to the high-stakes human drama facing a guy named Joseph.
And we had to do this with our, our first century glasses on. We need to understand the Jewish customs, Roman politics, and just the massive weight of history that Matthew is trying to summarize here.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture. I was reading through the background notes, and it struck me that this isn't just a random collection of ancestors. Matthew is actually playing with the structure.
He is. He's very deliberate.
He organizes the history of the world into these 3 specific blocks.
That's right. He breaks history down into 3 sets of 14 generations. Abraham to David, then David to the exile in Babylon, and finally the exile to the Messiah.
Now, I'm a pattern recognition guy, so when I see 14, 14, 14, I assume there's a code. And according to the commentary in our stack, this was absolutely not an accident. This is something called gematria.
Yes, gematria. It's a standard feature of Hebrew literature that we totally miss in English.
Okay.
In the ancient world, they didn't have separate symbols for numbers like we do, 1, 2, or 3. They used letters. So the first letter of the alphabet, Aleph, is 1, Bet is 2, and so on.
So every word also has a numerical value.
Precisely. And this is where Matthew is being incredibly clever. The central figure of Jewish history is, of course, King David.
Right.
In Hebrew, David is spelled with 3 letters. Delay, Vav, Dala.
Okay, let me check the math from the notes here. So Dalet is the 4th letter, that's 4. Vav is the 6th letter, so that's 6. And Dalet again is 4.
So 4 plus 6 plus 4.
Is 14.
14.
Wow!
Matthew structures the entire genealogy into sets of 14 to basically scream, David, David, David. He's making a theological argument through math. He is telling the reader, before he even introduces Jesus, that this person is the ultimate David. He is the king who is promised.
It's like highlighting text in neon script.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. I've looked at the genealogy in the Gospel of Luke, and the names don't actually match up.
Ah, yes.
It's a common stumbling block for people. In Matthew, Joseph's dad is Jacob, but in Luke, Joseph's dad is Heli.
This is a classic historical puzzle. But the sources we have lay out a really compelling explanation. It all comes down to the difference between a legal lineage and a biological lineage.
Right, because Matthew is obsessed with the king aspect of it.
He is. Matthew is tracing the legal line of succession to the throne. This is the crown lineage.
Okay.
And that passes through the legal father, which is Joseph. Luke, on the other hand, seems to be tracing the biological descent, and it's likely through Mary's line, going all the way back to Adam to show Jesus' humanity.
So Matthew is saying, here are his credentials to rule, and Luke is saying, here is his DNA.
That's a great way to put it. But there is another reason why Matthew writing this down was so critical. We have to look at the date.
Right.
Matthew's writing this in the 1st century, likely before the fall of Jerusalem.
This was the part of the research that honestly gave me chills, the archaeological urgency note. It mentioned that all the official genealogical records, the proof of who was a priest, who was king, who owned what land, were kept in the temple archives in Jerusalem.
And in 70 AD, the Roman legions under Titus smashed Jerusalem. They burned the temple to the ground, those archives.
Gone.
Gone. Incinerated.
So if Matthew hadn't written this down when he did, the proof of the Davidic line would have just been lost to history forever.
It's like a backup drive of history created just before the hard drive crashed.
Yeah.
After 70 AD, no one could legally prove they were from the line of David anymore. The records just didn't exist. So Matthew preserves this lineage of the Messiah in the final moments before the window closed.
That adds such a layer of intensity to what looks like a boring list. Now, speaking of intensity, let's talk about that middle section of the list, the timeline from David to the exile. The notes describe this as the dark ages of the genealogy.
It really is the descent into disaster. You have a lot of bad kings in there, leading up to the exile to Babylon.
And for a modern listener, exile might just sound like they had to move house, but this was the end of the world for them.
Oh, completely. The nation was conquered, the city destroyed, the elites dragged off in chains to a foreign land.
It puts a total stop to the line of kings. It's a dead end.
It should have been, and that's why including Jeconiah, the king who presided over that collapse, is so significant. It shows that the thread of the promise wasn't cut. God preserved the royal line even through the absolute worst catastrophe in their national history.
So it's a story of survival, but as I was reading the names, I realized it's also a story of, well, scandal. And this is my favorite part of the deep dive.
Of course it is.
Usually, ancient genealogies are a total boys' club. It's father, son, but Matthew breaks protocol. He drops in 4 women.
And not the women you would expect. If you were trying to impress a Jewish audience with a royal pedigree, you'd list Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, the matriarchs, the clean ones.
But Matthew doesn't do that at all. He lists Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. And looking at their bios in our source stack, wow, this is not a list of saints.
No.
This is the real housewives of the Old Testament.
It really is. It's the scandalous.
Let's break them down because the details here really matter. Take Tamar. I vaguely remembered her name, but I'd forgotten the story. She was the daughter-in-law of Judah, right?
Yes. And the story is complicated, to say the least. Judah refused to let his youngest son marry her after her husband's died, so she took matters into her own hands.
She did.
She disguised herself as a prostitute, sat by the road, and tricked Judah, her own father-in-law, into sleeping with her to get pregnant and secure her rights.
And Matthew puts her in the lineage of Jesus, Tamar, who disguised herself to trick the patriarch.
He puts her right there. And then you get Rahab.
Rahab was a professional prostitute living in Jericho, and she was a Canaanite, a foreigner.
A total outsider. But she hid the Israelite spies and had faith that their God was the true God. So she's in.
Then Ruth. Now, we usually think of Ruth as the sweet story, where you go, I will go, but the research really emphasizes that she was a Moabitess.
And that's a huge red flag in the ancient world. The Moabites were historical enemies of Israel. The law of Moses actually said Moabites were excluded from the assembly of the Lord.
Wow.
And yet here she is, the great-grandmother of King David.
And finally, the one that really stood out to me, Bathsheba. But Matthew doesn't even use her name.
No, he doesn't.
He calls her Uriah's wife.
That is a deliberate literary dagger. By calling her Uriah's wife, Matthew is forcing the reader to remember the murder. King David slept with Bathsheba, got her pregnant, and then had her husband Uriah killed just to cover it up. It was the darkest moral stain on David's entire life.
So let's just look at this lineup. We have a woman who used deception and incestuous overtones to get justice, a Canaanite prostitute, a Moabite enemy, and the partner in an adulterous, murderous affair. Why on earth would you put them in the resume of the Messiah?
It's what you could call the scandal of grace. If Matthew wanted to prove that Jesus was biologically pure or came from some line of moral perfection, he failed miserably.
Yeah, he really did.
But that's not his point. He is shouting to the reader that God's grace works through the messy, the broken, the outsider, and the sinful.
It sets the stage for the entire gospel. It's basically saying, hey, if you think you're too messed up to be part of this story, just look at the grandmothers.
Exactly. It proves that the Messiah isn't just for the outsiders, he actually comes from the outsiders. It shatters the idea that you need a perfect pedigree to be used by God.
That is a massive theological mic drop hidden in a list of names. Okay, so Matthew establishes this grand, messy, royal history, but then he zooms the camera way in.
Really?
He moves from centuries of history to one terrified guy in a room, Joseph.
This shift in verse 18 is so dramatic. While Luke tells the Christmas story from Mary's perspective, Matthew is 100% focused on Joseph's dilemma.
And dilemma feels like a huge understatement. The text says Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant. Now, modern listeners here engaged, and we think, okay, awkward breakup. But the sources are clear that betrothal was way more serious.
A completely different universe. In first century Jewish law, betrothal was marriage. You were legally husband and wife, but you had a roughly 1-year waiting period before you lived together or consummated the marriage.
So you couldn't just walk away.
No. To end a betrothal, you had to get a legal divorce.
So when Mary turns up pregnant, from Joseph's perspective, this isn't just a breakup, this is
adultery. It's a devastating betrayal. He thinks she has cheated on him.
And under a strict interpretation of the Mosaic Law, adultery was a capital offense. The text in Deuteronomy mentions stoning.
At the very least, it meant public humiliation and total social ruin for her.
And this is where we get a masterclass in character. Verse 19 ascribes Joseph as a righteous man. I've always read that as, he followed the rules. But if he strictly followed the rules, wouldn't he have exposed her?
That's the tension. The text says, because he was righteous and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. This redefines righteousness for us.
Correct.
It's not just rule-keeping. Real righteousness, according to Matthew, is interpreting the law through the lens of mercy.
I just try to put myself in his shoes. He's heartbroken. He feels betrayed. His reputation is on the line. He has every right to play the victim, to drag her into the town square and say, look what she did to me.
But he doesn't.
But he decides to absorb the shame himself.
He chooses to protect the person he thinks hurt him. That is a profound level of character. He's planning to end it, but he's trying to save her life and her dignity in the process.
But then the script flips. He's asleep, probably tossing and turning, and he has a dream.
An angel of the Lord appears. And notice the very first thing the angel says, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid. That implies he was terrified.
He was likely paralyzed by fear. Fear of public opinion, fear of the shame, fear of making the wrong choice. The angel has to completely reframe his entire reality. He explains that Mary hasn't been unfaithful, that this child is from the Holy Spirit.
And then the angel gives him a job description.
Yeah.
She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. I read in the notes that this isn't just a suggestion for a baby name. This is a legal act.
It's the crucial legal pivot. We talked earlier about the legal line coming through Joseph, right?
Right.
By Joseph naming the child, he is formally acknowledging him. He is adopting Jesus.
So that's how the genealogy works. Jesus isn't Joseph's biological son, but because Joseph obeys and names him, Jesus gets the legal rights to the throne of David.
Yes, the entire prophecy of the Messiah being the son of David hangs on Joseph overcoming his hurt and his fear to adopt this child. If Joseph says no, the legal link is broken.
That puts an incredible amount of weight on a carpenter from Nazareth. He has to raise a son that isn't his, knowing the neighbors are going to whisper about the illegitimate timing for the rest of his life.
It's a life of quiet sacrifice. He trades his personal reputation for God's plan.
Now let's wrap up with the names themselves, because the angel drops two massive titles here. First, Jesus.
Jesus is the Greek version of the Hebrew Yeshua, or Joshua. It literally means Yahweh saves.
So his name is his job description.
Exactly. The angel says, because he will save his people from their sins. It defines the mission right there. He isn't coming just to be a teacher or a political rebel against Rome. He is coming to rescue people from the fundamental problem of sin.
And then Matthew connects this to a prophecy from Isaiah regarding the virgin birth, and he gives us the title Immanuel.
Immanuel, which means God with us.
I love the combination of those two, God saves and God with us.
It covers both the action and the presence. He rescues, but he doesn't rescue from a distance. He comes down to be with the people he is saving. It circles all the way back to the very beginning of the chapter.
How so?
Well, think about the genealogy. It starts with Abraham, goes through the glory of David, drags through the mud of the exile, survives the silence, includes the outsiders and the scandalous women, and finally arrives at this moment. Why? So that God could be with us. The list of names is basically a map of God pursuing humanity through all our mess until he finally arrives in person.
That really changes how I see that wall of text. It's not a barrier, it's a bridge. It links the ancient promises to a very personal reality.
And it links it to us. The genealogy tells us Jesus has the credentials to be king. The story of the women tells us he has the grace to include us. And the name Immanuel tells us he is still present.
Before we go, I want to return to Joseph one last time. We tend to focus on the manger and the star, but Joseph's internal journey is really what makes this chapter happen. He goes from planning a divorce to walking into a total mystery.
Verse 24 is one of my favorite, most understated verses in the Bible. When Joseph woke up, He did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him.
No argument, no asking for a second opinion, just obedience.
He woke up and did the hard thing, the scary thing.
It makes me think about how we make decisions. We often want a neon sign or some kind of guarantee that everything will work out perfectly. Joseph didn't get a guarantee that the neighbors wouldn't talk.
Not at all.
He just got a command to not be afraid.
And that leads to a provocative thought for you, for our listeners, to mull over. The salvation of the world, in a sense, pivoted on one man's quiet obedience in the middle of a personal crisis. Joseph didn't know the full scope of history he was altering. He just knew what he had to do today.
That's powerful. It makes you wonder, where might quiet obedience in your own life be aligning you with a bigger plan that you can't see yet?
That is the question. Sometimes the most important thing isn't the big public splash, but the private decision to trust God when it just doesn't make sense.
Well, I'm certainly not going to skip the introduction next time. There is a lot of gold in those hills. Thanks for unpacking this with me.
It was a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.